Now, in teaching, you must of course remember that you cannot teach what isn't your own consciousness, because in teaching we are imparting our own consciousness. And if there is something we don't know, we can't impart it. And in a spiritual teaching, if you don't know it spiritually, you can't impart it, even if you can recite the quotations from the books. Therefore, when you are teaching, you are keeping in mind constantly, because to some extent this must have become a part of your very being, that God is not a power, and you are not going to use God as a power. You are not going to use truth over error. You are not going to use the divine mind against the mortal mind, but rather that you are going to live in the consciousness and impart the consciousness that because God is omnipotence, there is no other power or presence or law. This, of course, must be as much a part of the teacher's being as the ABCs. In the same way, and here is where we come to two tremendous points that separates the entire message of the infinite way from all other messages. And the first one is the universal nature of error as against personal. We in our work are never dealing with an erroneous person that we're going to make right, or a disease we're going to get rid of for which to substitute health. We are never going to correct, reform, or heal an individual. We recognize that all error has its basis in a universal belief in two powers. And therefore, our treatment is never aimed at a person. Above all, we do not use any psychological approaches like, well, now if you were just grateful, you could get healed, or if you read 12 pages of the books every day, you'd get healed, or if you would just be more loving with your husband or more patient with your wife. Those are all psychological approaches that have nothing whatsoever to do to our work. Our work is a constant abiding in the fact that all evil has its basis in the carnal mind. That is a universal belief in two powers. And therefore, we are constantly impersonalizing. But if we are not living that life of impersonalization, there's no use trying to teach it. Because even if we use the right words in teaching, we're not getting it across to the consciousness of the student, because they are not going by the words we say, but by the consciousness we elevate them to. Therefore, the first responsibility of an individual is not to heal or teach, but to develop within themselves the consciousness of these major principles, so that when they go out to heal or teach, that they have the consciousness with which to work. Then this brings us to another point. In the book The Infinite Way, it says, you cannot meet a problem on the level of the problem. Now 90% of our failures to heal base from our ignorance of the meaning of that statement. When a person says they're dying, or someone says it to us for them, our immediate thought, from every human standpoint, would be to, what are we going to do to save their life? When a person talks of unhappiness in their marriage, the first thought runs to what can be done to make their marriage happy. When the patient is unemployed, the first thought wants to run to what do we think or know to bring to them employment. And all of this is a barrier to our success and to theirs. Because we are not healers of disease or of sin, nor are we employment agencies, nor are we marriage counselors. We do not meet a problem on the level of the problem. Therefore, no matter what the patient is saying to us about their problem, we're really not hearing it. And certainly we are not answering it, because that would put us in the realm of counselors and doctors. You cannot meet a problem on the level of the problem. Now, here is the picture that confronts you. There is sick humanhood and well humanhood. There is sinful humanhood and pure humanhood. There is living humanhood and dead humanhood. And the entire aim of the medical and ministerial world is to take that bad or erroneous humanhood and put it over here onto the good side, and we have nothing to do with that. That does not enter our ministry at all. We have absolutely no part in a ministry that is trying to change the bad into the good. The function of our ministry is down through the center, what we call the middle path. Where we ignore everything that is being told to us about sin, disease, death, lack, limitation, and politics. And where we ignore what a wonderful society it would be if only the politicians were honest, or if everybody was humanly well, or if everybody had a sufficient income. It just doesn't work. We had periods, let us say in American history, where on the whole things were very good, from the 1890s on up through the early 1900s. The country made tremendous progress. Fortunes were made, employment was high, so forth and so on. But it didn't stay that way. From the Civil War to World War I, the only little scrap we had was the Spanish-American War, which, considering the size of it, was really a skirmish, except to the people who were killed or permanently disabled in it. But since the First World War, we've had nothing but world wars all over the world, on huge, tremendous scales. So that if you could be as wise as the founding fathers and make the nation free and then give it a constitution to keep it free, you have no assurance what the next generation or the one after that will do to it, to pull it to pieces. If you could make all of your patients well, how would you go about keeping them well? if you could be sure that all of the sinners and alcoholics that came to you could be immediately transformed, what would you do about keeping it that way? And the answer is nothing. Because good humanhood can become bad humanhood can become good humanhood, and so you go on generation after generation in that way. Now, making the sick well is not our function. Making the sinful pure is not our function. Turning bad politics into good politics is not our function. Our function is to awaken to the truth of man's spiritual nature. That is our entire function. To know the spiritual nature of God, the spiritual nature of the universe that God created, the spiritual nature of the image and likeness of God. We live and move and have our being in the divine consciousness, which is too pure to behold iniquity, into which nothing can enter that defileth or maketh a lie. So that I must in some measure be able to say, nothing that you tell me about yourself will I believe. Not even if you tell me something good. I can express appreciation if you have a healing, but I can't take it seriously because I don't know what you'll come back with next week. Sometime you get cleared out of one devil to make room for 7 to enter. My rejoicing is when an individual awakens to the spiritual nature of life, the spiritual source of life, and the spiritual path. As, for instance, this week I have had 3 with whom I have been working who have had their names called aloud. 3 in 1 week. Well, now, I can rejoice in that because they never will be the same again. No matter what happens, no matter how much humanhood there remains in their life, it will never be the full extent of humanhood that it previously was, because now they know that they are in tune with something of a spiritual, transcendental nature, and more now they will be listening for that voice. Well, you see, it has nothing to do with whether they had a claim of sickness or sin or lack, does it? Once they are in tune with the infinite, once they are receptive to that voice and receive it, my function has to that extent been completed with them. I have led them, lifted them in consciousness to the ability to hear the still small voice, and it is only in the still small voice that you find God, and God power, and God presence. So that when I am doing my healing work, I'm not concerning myself with whether the fever comes down or the lump. I'm not concerning myself with whether they can walk or whether they are in a mental institute. I'm not concerning myself with that at all, and I'm not trying to turn it into the opposite. I live and move and have my being in this inner communion in which the still small voice reveals to me the nature of God, the nature of God's universe, the nature of God's being as man. By dwelling in this middle path, I am not trying to meet the problem on the level of the problem. Now, when I am teaching I am remembering this, so that whether I voice it or not, I still am imparting to the student the fact that we are not meeting problems on the level of the problems. We are not turning unhappy marriages into happy ones. We are not turning lack into abundance. We are not turning unemployment into employment. We are not turning the alcoholic into a non-alcoholic. No. This would be resisting evil. This would be fighting the appearance. Go and fight windmills. Oh no, we refrain from entering into a combat. In legal terms, the issue must be drawn. There must be one side to say, this is it, and this side to say, no, this isn't it, and now the issue is joined. That's the legal term. The issue is joined. Unless an issue is joined, there is no law case. There has to be somebody to say yes and somebody to say no. Otherwise, you cannot go to court. If both sides are in agreement, there is no case. Now, when an appearance is presented to you of person, place, thing, circumstance, or condition, and you deny it, the issue is joined, and now you go to court and fight it out. But if you brush aside the appearance and go down here to the realization of the spiritual nature of God and His creation and His own being expressed as man, now you will have spiritual healings. Not mental healings, not metaphysical healings, but spiritual healings. Because there will be no power involved. There is no power involved in this whatsoever. You don't want even a God power to do something to something. You are abiding in the nature of spiritual cause and creation. Well, this is what we call the infinite way consciousness. The consciousness that does not fight back at the appearance. The consciousness that does not try to change the appearance. All of the infinite way writings tell us over and over again, do not try to change humanhood. And yet, consciously, subconsciously, unconsciously, we're all trying to do that, aren't we? And we are so happy when someone tells us the pain stopped. When, as a matter of fact, it might be far better if that pain continued until they were compelled to awaken. That is why the writings tell us this. A problem isn't a problem, it is an opportunity. Tell me, why should a human being who is well and moderately happy and moderately successful, why should they give their life to the spiritual path? And the answer is not only there is no reason why, but they won't. And that you can tell by what goes on in your practice, that as soon as the patient is well, they tell you to stop work and goodbye until they get the next claim. In other words, they're going to be perfectly happy in their newfound human health and wealth. 80% of them are, 90% of them. And yet, instead of telling you to stop when they've been healed, they ought to be saying, start. Now, lead me to that consciousness so that I can maintain it for myself, my family, and all who may be led to me. See that? Now, when you are arranging classes, always these points must be uppermost in your mind. Because whether it is an individual coming to you for healing or counseling, or whether you have 3, 5, 10 students coming together once a week for some instruction, you cannot give it to them, even if you take the books and work from them, because you do not have these specific principles which must be constantly brought to light so as to change the nature of the consciousness of the individual. In other words, if you were to spend a whole hour with your one person or your little group bringing out this point of not changing bad humanhood into good humanhood, but rather learning to ignore the appearance and go down the center path, the middle path, and abide in the spiritual realities, when they left you that day, that thought would be impressed on them. Of course, it won't remain. That's why it has to be gone over and over and over again. And one by one, each one will say, sometimes this month and sometimes 5 years from now, oh, you know what I discovered? You don't change humanhood. I had a man who had been studying the infinite way for years, many years, well, I guess 10, who wrote me a letter and told me he's made a great discovery and he's going to write a book about it. That the error that appears to you isn't power, and you don't have to do anything to it. He's discovered this, and he's going to write a book about it. I wrote to him that to be sure to remember that there were already 20 other books written on the same subject. He didn't know that. Been studying them for 10 years. So it is that never be surprised if a student comes in and tells you they had an original revelation, and maybe Joel would like to hear this. You know, evil isn't personal. Oh, it happens. But it's fine that it does, because when a revelation comes to an individual, it is an original discovery with them that they never knew before. Intellectually they knew it, not inwardly. But the point that I am making is this, that each time that a teacher or practitioner attempts to give one individual or a group an oral treatment or a lesson, they will not succeed unless they have in mind a specific point, because it is that specific point that raises the consciousness of the patient or the student and gives them a working principle. For instance, you have noted how much in these last months we have harped on the words omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence. Now, not only you must spend an hour showing the student the meaning of those three words, but you have to have another lesson a month from now on the same subject, because even if they remember that they had the lesson, they haven't yet attained the consciousness of it. Again, giving those three words to a student will do exactly nothing for them. One has to spend a long, long time with each one of those words, showing specifically their meaning and the application. For instance, suppose we took the word omniscience, which we do, in order to teach us more about prayer. And the teacher has to say to the student, look, do you know what omniscience means? If not, let us refer to a dictionary. And understand that omniscience means all-knowing God. God the all-knowing, God the all-wise. And now, pause for a moment and think. God is the all-knowing, God is the all-wise. What would you like to tell God in this treatment or prayer? And then you see, by that concrete, specific example, you close their mouths, don't you? And their minds, because they have to laugh at themselves then, do they not? Just think of me, little old me, trying to tell God what I need. And God is omniscience. Think of me trying to tell God when I need it. When God knows when every blossom should bloom and when every fruit should be there and so forth and so on. And nothing except a concrete example like that will stop the mind of the person who has erroneously been taught how to pray or treat. See that? Omnipotence. All power. God then is all power. What would you like God to do? To what would you like it to do it? To whom would you like to do it? God is all power, meaning the only power. So is there anything to use God power on? But you see, if the teacher and the practitioner isn't fully aware of these three words and their meaning and their application, how can they teach them to anybody, or how can they convey the consciousness to anyone? Be assured that no patient and no student gathers any more from a practitioner or teacher than the practitioner's or teacher's consciousness. No more. Then, you can't give this to beginners, but later, when you begin to work with patients or students on this principle that we do not meet a problem on the level of the problem. Of course, this is the most advanced step in the message of the infinite way. Therefore, it could only be imparted by a practitioner or teacher who had caught its significance. If the practitioner or teacher is at that stage where they are not trying to make this a better world, they are at the highest mystical point where we have lost all our interest in changing negative humanhood into positive, bad humanhood into good, where we are interested in one thing only: the reign of God on earth. That's all. That's all. For me to be sure that I'm dealing only with the realization that God's kingdom is on earth as it is in heaven, because heaven and earth is one. Heaven may be the invisible cause and earth is the visible manifestation of it, but they're one. Now, in proportion as I permit myself to be God-governed, my life is God-governed. But I can't just say, oh yes, God, I'm ready for you to govern me. That is not giving oneself to God's government. To give oneself to God's government means to accept the laws of God. We have to accept the laws of God, and we have to act on them. And that means that insofar as I find it possible, I must always consciously remember that love is the secret of the religious life. That unless I am loving my neighbor as myself, unless I am forgiving, unless I am doing it unto the least of these my brethren, I am not accepting God's government. I am asking for God's government while I continue to live in man's government of self-preservation as the first law of nature. In the same way, it is hopeless for a practitioner or a teacher to expect to have a great influence on students if they themselves are still living in the consciousness of wanting a God power to do something, or trying to meet the problem on the level of the problem. In other words, the demonstration for patient or student can't be any higher than the practitioner's consciousness. That was why the disciples could do healing work, but occasionally had to bring a patient to the master. And he told them they needed greater faith. Well, not faith in the sense of a blind faith that, oh, God is a great power. He probably had well instructed them in the meaning of faith. Faith is really your understanding of these spiritual principles. In other words, if you have come to the point of conviction that there is a government by Christ, that's faith. But it has to be a conviction, not a blind faith that, oh, I know God can do everything. If you have surrendered your own life within yourself to where you are less and less depending on human footsteps, less and less trying to turn the bad into the good, and more abiding in the realization of God's grace. If you yourself are less and less fighting evil, less and less seeking a power with which to overcome evil, less and less seeking to have your enemies destroyed, but a consciousness which is more and more ignoring the appearances and abiding in the realization that God's grace is the sufficiency unto this universe. God's grace is my sufficiency, not by might, not by power, not by taking thought, not by taking up the sword. God's grace is my sufficiency. And whatever is to be accomplished in my life must be accomplished by God's grace, not by fighting an enemy. You know, it is better to yield to a temptation than to fight it at this stage of our work. Because even if the evil condition persists for a while, we are refraining from taking up the sword, and we are relying on the fact of its non-power. So that even if it continues for a while, we're better to let it than to fight it, resist it. Mrs. Eddy had a very clear picture of that one time when she said that the error, the sin that is condemned in your mind is forgiven even if it has not wholly disappeared. In other words, from the moment that you acknowledge you're no part of me and I want no part of you, and this is not of God and therefore it can only be an appearance, a temptation, an illusion, even if it persists a while you back here are holding it in its nothingness, you are better off than if you were fighting it and resisting it and really making it a power. That's hard to see, but it's a fact. This again is not one of the points that is for the beginners, but ultimately you can bring this to light, that since actually evil is not a power, it is far better for it to be suffered to be so now than it is to sit up all night fighting and battling and making a reality of it. That is why in our work you find nowhere in the writings where I tell a student what they must or must not do or what they must give up. I don't tell them to give up smoking, I don't tell them to give up drinking, I don't tell them to give up adultery, I don't tell them to give up anything that's going on. I ignore that. The fact that they've come to me is, of course, proof of their desire to be free. And all I do with them is hold them here on the spiritual truth and let these other things dissolve of their nothingness. I don't even tell patients they must stop taking medicine, because while there is some faith in it, could cause more trouble taking it away from them than letting it to be suffered to be so now. What we go by in the student is not what they're doing or thinking when they come to us, but what changes take place as they continue to come to us. And if we see we are making inroads into their consciousness, we can be sure their errors are leaving them. See that? We do not moralize. We do not psychologize. We pay no attention to bad humanhood and no attempt to make it good humanhood. We are always imparting spiritual truth and ignoring the appearance and not watching the evil turn to good, because that is not what we're seeking. We're seeking the evidence that Christ has touched an individual. When it does, the Christ will do all the work of, I am come that ye might have life and that ye might have it more abundantly. So when you can bring the Christ to an individual, it will see to it that the diseases are healed, the sins are washed out, the lacks are eliminated. The Christ does that, not you nor I. Not the infinite way. The Christ does that. Our function is to waken that Christ in an individual. And this we do by this method of teaching. I get letters, I've had 2 this week, from people who have had Christian Science practitioners who gave up the case because they had no more money to pay. Others give up the case because the patient had to take some medicine or had to go to a hospital. That's not our function. Our function is to respond to the calls that come to us. And the only time we dismiss anyone is when there is an evident lack of integrity, or when the degree of argumentation is so great that we just can't keep it up. We have no time to waste on arguments. I had to answer a letter yesterday of a student who wants to come here to have a series of appointments with me to discuss the afterlife, reincarnation, theosophy, so forth. And I wrote back that I found no profit in such a discussion, because any person seriously interested in those subjects could find lots of wonderful books, and that would make discussion unnecessary. And of what avail would my opinion be on those subjects? Is anyone going to accept my opinion on them? No. Then why take up time discussing them? I take up very little time mentioning them in the writings for that reason, that I don't ask anyone to take my... I will reveal my unfoldment on it. But I'm not going to discuss it and compare it with your unfoldment on it, because I am not interested. So it is in our teaching work, whether it's with one patient in an office or a class, we never permit discussion. Never permit the patient or the student to give us their idea on anything. Not interested in it one bit. Not one bit. If they have such good ideas, let them go out into the world with it and establish it and prove it. If I have one patient in my office, or if I have a student, or if I have a whole class full, my function is to reveal to them truth as it has been revealed to me. It's not my function to care whether they accept it or not. That is a point of receptivity within them. They come to me and I give it. The infinite way is really my personal religious life. My religious convictions, my religious unfoldments and revelations, and I set them down in books and on tapes and send them forth. That ends my responsibility, because I couldn't make anyone believe one statement that they're not prepared to receive, and no amount of arguing, discussing, or debating will change anyone's mind about anything. Not anything of a spiritual nature, at least. And therefore, while others and other teachings may have wonderful results by changing sick humanhood to well humanhood, or by looking for the error in the patient's thought, none of that plays a part in the message of the infinite way, and I stand on the message of the infinite way as our activity. Anyone else wanting any other activity is free, because we haven't snared them into a membership. We haven't signed them up to a certain amount of years of paying us so much a month. From the moment of their coming to us, we give them the freedom to leave. Our relationship is one of love. It is a free giving and a free receiving. Now, you see that we have covered today two principles. The principle of the not going to God for a power, not telling God. In other words, we have repeated again omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence, and we have added to it the principle of not trying to improve humanhood, not meeting a problem on the level of the problem. As you can well see, we cannot give too many hours to the same subject, because until these principles have become our principles, have become embodied in our own consciousness, so that it is automatic to ignore the person who says, I have a terrible pain, will you do something about it? Where it has become automatic to disregard the number of the fever or the size of the lump, and come right down to our middle path of ignoring the appearances and abiding in the spiritual realities, and coming to that place of stillness where we can say, Speak, Lord, thy servant heareth, and then let the power of God be made evident through the still small voice. Now you can see that from this lesson today, if you yourself have all of these principles in your mind, that you really have the subject for, let us say, 3 lessons. You could make up 3 lessons from this tape. And take one of the subjects in each lesson, then, or maybe 2, And then the third one, let it be a review of these principles. So you will see that actually every hour of instruction that we are having here will become 3 hours of instruction in your actual practice. The first hour will be 6 hours of instruction, but all the rest of them will probably be 3 for every hour. Because you will work yourself with each one of these subjects until you know that, yes, that's the principle from which I work. Until you have trained yourself to walk down the street and say, not bad humanhood, not good humanhood, Christhood. Until you have trained yourself to have blinkers on your eyes so that you don't see what's on the left and on the right, but right down the middle, Christhood. Christhood. Acknowledge Christhood in the midst of you. Acknowledge Christhood as the true being, individual being, human, animal, vegetable, mineral. That word I comes up again. I am come that ye might have life, and that ye might have it more abundantly. And you see, that doesn't mean that you have to do anything in the healing work. You have to keep knowing, I am come that the Christ, and then let the Christ do its work. Neither you nor I nor the whole infinite way can change the history of this world. Only the Christ can do that. And our function is to bring the Christ into activity. A minister with whom we had 2 6-hour appointments some years ago ended up the second appointment by saying, I see what you mean. The same Christ that was on the earth 2,000 years ago to do all these great works is here now. I said, yes, that's what we're teaching. Oh, he said, if we ever taught that, we wouldn't have anybody coming to us. Why? Well, because eventually they'd be free, wouldn't they? Once they get the idea that Christ is the liberator, you have done all you can for them. After that, they don't need you or your organization. And that is your function, to set them free. To know that Christ is the activity of their own consciousness. Christ is the bread, the meat, the wine, the water. Christ is the resurrection. And in proportion as we know this, we yield ourselves to the Christ and let it raise us up. It was Christ that raised up Jesus from the tomb. Scripture says the same Spirit that raised up Jesus Christ from the tomb will raise up your mortal bodies. The same Spirit that raised up Jesus Christ from the dead. That same Spirit is the Christ, the Son of God. And that Son of God will raise up this whole earth. You won't, I won't. Christ, the Spirit of God in man, will. But we have to bring that Christ to conscious remembrance. Because as far as the world is concerned, it died 1,700, 2,000 years ago on the cross. The question arises, how does Joel know that these things are true? And the answer is, they have been revealed from within. And the next question comes up, is Joel an exclusive revelator? And the answer is no. No, Joel was merely led to discover meditation and to learn how to draw from within. And then, when that happened, the revelation came from within that God constitutes individual consciousness, Therefore, every individual has access to infinity. Every individual can know anything and everything they desire to know. Scripture confirms it. In the end, all must be taught of God. But if you're going around looking for a God, you won't be taught of God. Only when you come into the awareness that God constitutes your individual consciousness, and therefore your individual consciousness is the source of infinite wisdom and eternal harmony, and that it is your individual consciousness that is your bread, meat, wine, and water, that feeds you, clothes you, houses you, instructs you. This was revealed to Joel in his meditations. What further will be revealed to you, nobody can tell, because God is infinite. And be assured that there is more to be revealed than ever has been revealed. Let no one ever convince you that the end of revelation has come. One of the disastrous things in the world is to believe that all of the truth is in the Old Testament and the New Testament, as if there were no truth before the Old Testament, and as if God closed up shop after the New Testament. If God is the revelator of truth, then before Abraham was, God was revealing truth. And since I will be with you unto the end of the world, God will be revealing truth to individuals unto the end of the world. Therefore, one of your prime functions as a teacher or even a practitioner is to reveal to those who come to you that your goal is to lead them to where they draw forth their health and supply from within their own being. That at the present time you are the bridge over which they travel. But that if you do not go away, the Comforter will not come to them. That they in their turn must carry on this work. You know, the sad thing is that if you got to be the best healer in the world, you'd have the whole world to heal, which you couldn't do, unless you could teach others, and unless others could take up this work. I have to write to many who write to me and say, no, you are the mother, or you are the wife, or you are the father. It's up to you to learn this sufficiently to do the work for your family. You know what unconsciously happens? People really get to believe you can buy healings, that you can just pay a practitioner for their healings. Well, you know that isn't possible. That isn't possible. God's grace can't be bought. Can't do it. If it could, all the rich people would have to do would be to hire us. Well, it wouldn't work. It just wouldn't work. They wouldn't get the benefit of it. There has to be a yielding on the part of the individual and a willingness to receive and then just as freely give as they freely received. So it is that you have to bring to your students and patients this additional principle. Since God constitutes your individual consciousness, remember, your consciousness is as infinite as mine. And part of our work in the infinite way is to teach you through meditation to go back. And so you can see you can have lessons, classes on meditation for years and years and years. Because none of your patients or students, with few exceptions, are going to learn it rapidly. It is too foreign to the Occidental thought. This whole thing that we do in meditation is so startling to the Occidental thought that it can't accept it. And it may surprise you to know that The Art of Meditation is the smallest selling book of the whole Infinite Way titles. Why? Because the students and patients want you to learn it and give them the benefit of it. And what do you think is the next smallest selling book? The Art of Spiritual Healing. You say, why, no, all our people are interested in it. No, they're interested in you being interested in it. Think of that. Would you believe that those two books are the smallest? You would think they're the two largest. No. They sell 1/2 the rate of the others. Sure, our students are all interested in meditation and healing, if only you'll do it. And you watch the difficulty that you have with them, bringing them back to meditation and spiritual healing. See that? It's alarming when I see the sales on my statements. I tell you, I'm shocked. See? Because that's it. That's the way it is. And the same way with the monthly letters. You would think that with, well, there are far more than 50,000 people studying the Infinite Way, that there are only 6,000 letters going in circulation. Why? Everybody loves those letters for you. And that's why your function is to see that more interest is aroused in them, because without it you won't heal. There's nothing selfish about it. Nothing selfish about it, because it isn't for the sake of selling books. The royalties will always be the smallest part of the income. The greatest part is always through healing. So there's nothing selfish about it. It's very unselfish, because you want to set them free to play their part in the spiritual world. So when you start studying this tape, believe me, you've got something really to study. Because, above all things, you'll see now that you have to develop that consciousness that is not worrying why the patients aren't getting healed. You know right well why, because they're trying to get healed. It won't work. That's meeting the problem on the level of the problem. And you can't do that. You're going right down the middle in Christhood. It will help you in your work for your students if, in addition to arousing a more diligent study of the monthly letters, you will also encourage the study of those particular passages of chapters. Because the more they read them, the more they study them, the more it registers in consciousness, until one of these days they'll be saying of their own accord, oh, my protective work is the realization of there being nothing to protect against. And when that comes out spontaneously in them, then they've really got it. Or so it is with any other problem comes to mind, let's say supply. And if it ever spontaneously comes into their head, man shall not live by bread alone, their demonstration is made. Because they have not tried to meet the problem on the level of the problem. They've gone right out into the spiritual realities. Thank you.